We want to keep this conversation going and bring in the CEO of the Israel Innovation Fund, Adam Scott Bellos, former CIA operative Mike Baker, and still with us, former New York Lieutenant Governor and Newsmax contributor Betsy McCoy. Mike, I'm just seeing this now from the Israel War Room. The IDF has confirmed that 11 Israeli abductees are on their way to Israeli territory as we speak. We're now seeing another 2-day extension of this pause. Another 20 hostages expected to be released. What do you think about this? Is this good for Israel, or are we giving Hamas more of an advantage?
Well, look, as John Kirby mentioned, any pause in fighting is going to be used by Hamas, by the fighters, to regroup and resupply and rethink their tactics. So operationally, that's a bad thing. But anything that gets the hostages back home, right, is positive. I think we can all agree that getting additional aid to the residents in Gaza, assuming it gets to those residents and isn't hijacked by Al-Qassam brigades or by the fighters for Hamas, that's a good thing. But look, it's at some point, the Israeli government, the IDF, have already clearly stated their objective is to destroy Hamas, right? So they can't govern, they can't conduct terrorist operations. And that's their objective. And operationally, they're not there yet. So at some point, they will have to restart their military operations. And if we think the international condemnation, and the way that it turned as if Israel was somehow the guilty party was bad now, wait until the fighting resumes and see what the international community does then.
Yeah.
Adam, there's about 180 hostages left here, okay? And the way I'm understanding it, the deal is 1 day of ceasefire for 10 hostages. So technically, we could have 18 days more left of ceasefire. I think you see where I'm going with this. Does the ceasefire ever end, or does this keep going and going and going? And next thing you know, diplomacy, it comes in, and maybe the offensive kind of isn't the offensive that it was.
I absolutely do not think that the Israeli people would ever accept that. I think this is an extenuating circumstance, given the fact that the majority of the hostages that were released were women and children. And I think that's a very important note, given the atrocities that were committed against obviously men, but also specifically women and children on October the 7th. So I understand the want and need when the opportunity presented itself to get women and children out of Gaza. I do not foresee this ceasefire lasting any more than a few more days. I would be very surprised. Originally, Hamas had tried to negotiate for a full month, and the stoppage of heavy artillery movement, which we were unable to accept, which is why we did a 4-day ceasefire. I think that we have completely decimated Hamas in many respects. Obviously, the job is not done, but there's a reason why this ceasefire happened when it happened. And I just think the reality of it is that the soldiers of Israel and the people of Israel will never be able to accept that situation. We're going to only be okay with complete and utter defeat when it comes to Hamas.
You know, Betsy, we've been talking about this, about the children. They were separated from their parents. And Abigail, the 4-year-old American that was released yesterday, she was found under her father's dead body. He was shot to death right in front of her. She was covered with his blood. We're talking about monsters here. And then when you see these scenes like this, where the mother and the children, they're reunited with their dad and her husband, it just really brings it home.
It certainly does. Any parent, any grandparent would feel that immediately. And yet the left-wing propaganda machine is trying to establish a false parity between the Palestinians who live in Gaza and the Israelis. For example, a parity between the people who are being released from Israeli prisons, who are hardened criminals, adults who have committed terrible crimes, versus these children. And in the tunnels, they actually ripped children away from their parents and hid them in separate places. Can you imagine anything more cruel?
No, and that's Emily Hand that you're looking at right there, the 9-year-old that we saw the little girl there before. Yes. Her father famously had said that this is the video, he said, he was so worried about what would happen to her. He said she'd be better off dead, and there she is. He's embracing his daughter once again. Mike Baker, I wanted to ask you, I'm looking at Twitter right now, and I'm seeing what's trending here. Israeli new Nazism, Israeli genocidal state, Israel are terrorists. Talk to me about this propaganda war that it seems like Hamas is winning at this point.
Well, they are, and they knew they would, and they tend to always do it. This thing follows a kind of a predictable path, right? Whether it's the 7 October, slaughter that they committed, or any previous attacks that they've engaged in, they know how this narrative is going to play out. So that in itself is not a surprise. I think, for me, part of the surprise was just how many anti-Semitic bigots were just hiding in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to pop out, whether on college campuses or on the streets of Madrid or London or Rome or anywhere else and here in the U.S. But make no mistake, Hamas and their Iranian overlords, they knew how this would play out. They were probably surprised at how quickly they were able to dominate the narrative, given how, again, brutal that slaughter was on the 7th of October. But they knew where it would go.
They also have the extreme leftist kind of stuff that's going on around college campuses. I think a lot of young people that just absolutely suck in that, the way they've been brought up through. But I want to touch on...
I think you can blame President Biden, too, because he's been very equivocal about what's right and what's wrong here, expressing sympathy for the Palestinians.
Adam, I wanted to build off something Betsy was talking about, the kind of people that are being released, Palestinians that are hardened criminals here. The numbers are lopsided. There's many more Palestinians that have been released than hostages gotten back. How do the people of Israel feel about that right now?
I mean, listen, it's very clear that the math is not mathing, so to speak. And one of the accusations that has been thrown against Israelis is that we don't appreciate human life or Palestinian lives because we're willing to swap what's looked at as 3 for 1 right now, when in fact, we would love to be swapping 1 for 1. And not only that, the equivalence of a hostage being taken, which is a war crime, versus people that have been put away for stabbing Jews. Teenagers and adults, men, women, children of all different kinds.
Well, that's just it. The
These
media
are
tries
violent criminals. I mean,
put it out there that they're
disgusting.
teens. Let's make it clear. These aren't just like teenagers that are coming out here. These are
No,
criminals.
they're radicalized Palestinian youth. One of the biggest mistakes that the United States made when they pushed the Oslo Accords, and also Israel is to blame somewhat for this, but they did not, make a caveat for the education system of the Palestinian Authority. And instead, we've had 20 plus years of radicalized youth. And this is going to be one of the big questions that are going to be asked after this war is what will we do with such a radicalized population? And also, given what you were saying on college campuses, it's the same thing. It's the same narrative being pushed.
We're seeing it even in high schools now.
Right, we just did. We're continuing to see it. But, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave the conversation there. As always, thanks for coming on. Betsy McCoy, you stick around.